Thank you, Stephen. A number of guests duly introduced by fellows beg leave to attend your meeting. Is it your pleasure that I welcome them in your name? Thank you. Minutes.
Society of Antiquaries of London anniversary meeting, Thursday the 1st of May 2025 at 5 p.m, Burlington House and online. Professor Martin Millett, President in the chair. The minutes of the previous ordinary meeting of the 10th of April 2025 were read and signed. The President expresses thanks to retiring Director, Professor John Cooper, and the 3 retiring Council members, Dr. Robert Bewley, Dr. Anne McSween, and Dr. Timothy Schroeder. Since the ballots for Director and 3 ordinary members of Council were uncontested, the President declared elected for 2025 to 26, Director Dr. Sam Lucy, ordinary members of Council Dr. Kenneth Brophy, Dr. Dustin Fraser-Wood, Dr. Tim Loughton. The President announced that following the ballot, which closed earlier that day, the following were elected Fellows of the Society of Antiquaries: Mary Jane Nichols, Sophie Krautz, Sharon DeWitt, Heimo Dolenz, Katharina Bohm, Christophe Houchet de Quentin, Bill Stockting, Tom Holmes, Daniel Phillips, Peter Sabor. The Treasurer presented her annual financial statement, following which the meeting approved the appointment of Moore Kingston Smith LLP as the Society's auditors for 2025 to 26. The President read out a list of names of fellows deceased since the last anniversary meeting. The President thanked benefactors to the Society for 2024 to 25. The President awarded Society medals to Stephen Papworth and Merrill Foster. The President then gave his anniversary address. On the motion of Dr. Carol Bell, Treasurer, the following resolution was carried: that the thanks of the meeting be returned to the President for his address and that he be requested to allow it to be published. The President signified his assent. The meeting was adjourned at 6 p.m. and was followed by a reception.
Is it your pleasure that I sign these minutes as a true and complete record? Thank you. Ballots.
The following candidates for election were put to a ballot, which opened on Thursday the 5th of June and will close on Thursday the 3rd of July. I am reading the short version of the blue paper. The full version is available now for the inspection on the Fellows platform. Session 2025, on Thursday the 3rd of July 2025, the following candidates for election will be put to a ballot. The results of the ballot will be posted on the Society's website. Fellows can vote by post by downloading this ballot form or online. Blue papers are available for inspection on the Fellows platform, and the candidates' names are as follows: David Breer, Duncan James, Christine McDonnell, Ninya Michaela, Crispin Powell, and Samantha Smith.
Thank you. We now come to the main business of today's meeting, which is to hear a miscellany of 3 papers. Before I introduce these papers, can I just note with pleasure that all 3 projects have received grants from the Society towards their costs. So I hope you will appreciate and enjoy the work that's being presented. We're going to take the 3 papers in turn. The first paper is The Maritime World of the Mortar Wreck by Tom Cousins and Dr. Ian Friel, Fellow. Tom is a maritime archaeologist at Bournemouth University, where he's worked on a number of projects around the world from the Bronze Age to the Second World War. Alongside his teaching and other research activities, he's currently leading the investigation of the Mortar Wreck. Ian Friel is a historian with considerable experience of working on maritime archaeological projects, including Grace Dieu, 15th century, the Swash Channel Wreck, 1631, the potential Holy Ghost site, early 15th century, as well as the Mortar Wreck. I invite Tom and Ian to present.
Good to go. Okay, so as you said, we're talking today about the Mortar Wreck, and this is the project we were funded by the Society of Antiquaries to look into the more historic side and the archaeology side. I'm going to introduce a bit of background in the archaeology, then pass you over to Ian, who can tell you about some of the historic information we found out. It wants to move on. There we go. So to start off, where we're talking about Poole, which is in Dorset on the south coast, which is just here. So this little peninsula here is Poole Harbour. It claims to be the second biggest harbour in the world, although it's smaller than Chichester, but we ignore that. And this is a bit of a zoomed in to give you a bit of archaeological background to what I do. So we've got everything. So we've got Bronze Age finds coming up off the sea. We have what they sometimes call the largest port in Northern Europe from the Iron Age, and we've got a contemporary logboat. We have a huge Roman industrial complex to the south of the harbour, which is obviously there's going to be ships out there somewhere. We just don't know where they are yet. We do find occasionally bits of pottery out in the middle of the sea. We have a Viking fleet that went missing somewhere in this area, 96 ships supposedly sunk. We only find bits of pottery. And to more archaeological terms, we've got 16th century wreck, Studland Bay wreck, probably from Lisbon, trading pottery out of Seville. The 17th century Swash Channel wreck, which was mentioned, we worked on the end before. So this is a Dutch East Indian, probably going out to Venezuela to pick up salt. We've also got countless 18th and 19th century wrecks, all wrecked on the back of the hook, which is this big sandbank at the end there. We have the world's oldest aircraft carrier, sat in the bay there, so World War I, the first purpose-built vessel for an aircraft. And we have World War II training tanks. And this is all just in this very small area. If I expanded it out, there's a lot more out there. So to zoom in there, we've got the Swash and the Studland, the triangle, the circle and the square at the top. And for years in 1984, there's been this little obstruction on the side of the channel there, which everybody's told me since I've been starting diving in 2006 in this area, is just a pile of boring old stones. And as part of our wider work process, we have to survey all these wrecks every year to make sure that they're stable, make sure they're safe. And we had a bit of time, and our skipper just said to us, "Have you ever looked at this?" And I said, "Well, it's a big pile of boring stones, nothing there." They dived it in 1984. So thinking it's a boring pile of stones, two of my colleagues said, "Oh, they'll dive it." Gonna go, come on. And they dived it, found a big pile of boring stones covered in seaweed. But also surrounding this, we had some huge timbers, and the whole seabed was covered in mortars, so grinding mortars, which is why we called it the Mortar Wreck. And this was in 2019. We also found some more timbers that looked very medieval. So at this point, we think, well, we've actually got a really significant wreck. 2019, obviously, was then followed by 2020. That's how I've got to say. We also found some lovely copper pots down there, part of the crew's cooking kit. So followed by 2020. 2020 was obviously the year of the plague. So we eventually got out in August 2020, and this is what we found when we started doing an excavation. So we found, totally weren't expecting it, these Purbeck marble grave slabs. And I'll give more details on these later. But one of them with an immaculate condition, you can see all the chisel marks, you can see everything on them. And more importantly for us, as maritime archaeologists, I'll go to it a bit. We actually found bits of the ship. So we actually found bits of the ship, And because we have those timbers and it's clinker, which is overlapping planks split from a tree, we could sample that for dendrichronology and we can get the date. So we had cut these timbers, we can get the date. Fortunately, we didn't have the bark or sapwood on them because they trimmed that off. If we had that, we'd get it down to the season. So to give you an overview of the wreck and what it looks like on the seabed, you can just about see here, you have this large timber at the front, which is the very bow of the ship. That's surrounded by all this worked Purbeck marble, so worked grave slab, mortars, and other small bits. But then we just have this huge mound of about 30 tons of just rubble. And underneath that rubble is the ship itself. And off to the side, that's a frame of one of the ship's frames that's split from the main wreck. So in terms of dendrichronology, once it got back from the dendro labs, we got a date between 1242 and 1265 is when those trees were cut down, which makes it probably one of the older shipwrecks in the UK waters that we've actually got the physical timbers from. And interestingly, those timbers were sourced from the south of Ireland, so probably coming out of Waterford, out of things there, which does mean potentially it could have been built in Ireland, and it's one thing that Ian looked into. But the other thing we found is that the timbers cross-matched with Salisbury Cathedral. So there's Salisbury Cathedral. So we found out from that they're the same forest, basically, as Salisbury Cathedral. On average, it could even be the same tree, almost. But they're the same forest as Salisbury Cathedral. And we have a few other bits of ship's timbers around. I've got one on the east coast, a smaller boat, which was redone into a well lining, and that's as well Irish timbers. So these timbers were exported quite a lot across England during the 13th century. So when I'm talking about what the ship was carrying, you've got that massive pile of random rubble. It's literally that. It is just random rubble. So it's Purbeck limestone, which can only be excavated in this small area of our Dorset coast. And it's used locally as a building stone for rubble. So Christchurch Castle, just round the next harbour across, and Christchurch Priory, if you ever go there, you'll see lots of Purbeck stone in there, Christchurch Castle. Netley Abbey, and a few of our local churches as well, you'll see being built from this stone, because everywhere east of us doesn't really have decent stone, whereas everywhere west of us does. So it's exported there. And we also have at least one historic record that mentions the hard freestone of Corfe heading off to build the Tower of London. And I've been around the Tower of London and being sad, I've looked at all the walls and I can see lots of Purbeck stone in there, but it's dating. And I know they're working on it at the moment to see what date the stone is there. But probably the most significant stone we export is the marble. So this isn't a true marble, it's a really densely packed stone of snail fossils, of viviparous fossils. And you can polish it up to a sheen. And if you go to Westminster Abbey, as we've been this morning, everything internal there is Purbeck marble. So that's the Cosmati pavement, all the grey you see is Purbeck. And this is shipped all over England and slightly further afield as well. Oh, there we go. Back one. So what we have on the seabed are these two grave slabs. If you read some of the original reports, it says 3 because they're slightly farther apart. So we have these two grave slabs, and the one on the right, the blue one, this one here, we raised both of these last summer. You can see every single chisel mark, you can see everywhere they set it off, and the closest parallel we have to that is Stephen Langdon, who is the Archbishop who basically wrote Magna Carta, and that's in Christchurch, Canterbury. Which you can spin around if you want it to spin. Didn't want to spin. The other one we actually found out was in 2 pieces. Only when we raised it that we realised that those 2 pieces were the same cross. And that's the sort of the more you see that in churches around for your average parish priest or your abbot or your bishop. So in terms of distribution of where we find these slabs in the archaeological record, literally all over the east coast, the southeast coast of England. And the more you look, the more you find. So recently a group in Cornwall, there was none in Cornwall, they did a survey, they found loads, well, inspired by the wreck. But what you tend to do is find them either reburied into church floors, chucked out into the churchyard where they rot away into nothing because Purbeck just disintegrates into shells. Used as shelves and basically not really looked after, shoved in a cupboard. If you don't know what you're looking at, you might not realise the significance of these slabs. The other big category of stuff we have are the mortars. Now these seem to be ubiquitous across most of Northern Europe, of being made in Purbeck. But alongside the mortars, which are used for grinding, we've got things like hand mills, we've got cresset lamps, and we've got what potentially could be a portable altar. So we have all this sort of small stonework all mixed together at the front with the slabs as well. And there we go. I can make them spin just because I can make everything spin. Spin as well. But with that portable slab, it's polished on one side and left rough on the other. So we think it probably is either going to be inset into something or it can be used. Hand mills, there's only 3 of those in the archaeological record as we've found so far, made from Purbeck. And there could be a lot more down there. We've recorded 30, but we've never done a proper excavation on the site. We've only really hanged around on the surface. And if I go down there now, I can dig a hole and I can find more. So there could be up to 100 or some of the historic sources of things. But in terms of distribution and use, again, these are all over the south east of England, but we also find them in Ireland, as far east as Lübeck and into the Baltic. And we are starting to find some down in France, and there's probably a lot more of these around. They just need to be identified. And somebody, if you're excavating in France, you're not going to assume that this random stone's from some random corner of Dorset. But they weren't used just for cooking. They were used for pounding food, making medicines, making anything you want to grind up, and also used in construction and making mortars and stuff. So we do have some which are absolutely big, all variety of all different sizes, shapes, and geologies across the Purbeck Peninsula. We also found bits relating to the crew. So we found these 2 copper cauldrons, so a little postnet on the left and a big cauldron on the right. But we don't really know anything about the crew at this time. You can't find much about it. So we do find out, like, how do they cook on board ship. At the moment, I can say they stopped at a convenient whale, because every picture I found of crew cooking on one of a cauldron, they always stop off at a whale for some weird reason in all the medieval documents. But we do start finding these things, so we want to try and find out more about the crew. And to give a bit of historic background, if you don't know what's going on in the 13th century, we got King John at the start, Edward Longlegs at the end. People would have heard of them, but usually Henry III sort of gets glossed over in history because he was a bit boring and a bit dull. He didn't like going to wars, but then we did have things like the founding of Parliament, the building of Westminster Abbey. And the reason why I picked those 3 pictures, which might seem a bit odd, they're all made of Purbeck marble, they're tombs. And nearly every single Plantagenet king, apart from Richard III, had a Purbeck marble tomb. So if anyone wants to commission a new tomb for Richard III, out of Purbeck marble, so it's more like what he'd want, I'm sure I can do it for you. The other thing going on is the population of where our wreck is going up and up and up. So we're here, middle of the 13th century. If you lived in that time and you were your average peasant, your kids aren't dying, you've got good harvests for years. You don't know that 50, 100 years you're going to have famines and all sorts of plagues happen. So you're going to be, there's huge building works going on. So you'll probably see, if you look at your parish church, that would have been built in the 13th century or started in stone in the 13th century. Things like Salisbury Cathedral, Westminster Abbey, even going on to the continent, all of those big Gothic architectural things, they're all coming as a result of this 13th century population boom. And so to get the stone there, you need some way of transporting this stone around, and that's what we've got. So you can fit it into the wider context of Europe, the wreck as well. Locally for us, we have Wareham, which is the ancient town. There's been a port since the Saxons at least. That starts getting markets and charters and all these things in the 13th century, additional to what it had. Corfe Castle gets established as a town in 1215, 1217 with market charters. And Poole gets founded in 1248. So we're starting seeing all this big population building more towns and more mercantile people. But the big question that we have is the history, is the first thing is, where do you look to try and find the history? And then when you do find something that looks interesting in the archive, for example, this document at Dorset Archive looked quite interesting. They rolled it out. It was about 10 meters long in tight script Latin. And I'm like, well, I don't know anything to do with that, which is why, as part of this project, we commissioned Ian here to try and look over and try and make sense and pick out all that history part and put it together. So I'll pass over to Ian.
Thank you, Tom. My work on the Mortar Wreck project has been generously funded by the Society of Antiquaries. I'm extremely grateful for that. The aim of my research was to look at the historical evidence for the maritime world to which the Mortar Wreck belonged, and if possible, to identify the ship. I said at the project application stage that identification would be difficult, and I'm afraid that this has proved true. The original name of the ship and its exact date of loss remain unknown, at least for the present. However, in looking for the Mortar Wreck, I've been able to bring a very wide range of evidence for maritime activity, bring together a very wide range of evidence for maritime activity around the British Isles and Ireland in the 1200s. The report itself runs to over 50,000 words, so summarising it in 10 minutes is a bit of a tall order. But what I'll do is just list some of the topics it looks at and then discuss a few areas in a bit more detail. The work covers subjects such as the English law of wreck and the evidence for shipwrecks, maritime technology, seaports, ship owning and the shipping business, the uses of ships, the seaborne stone trade, piracy, war at sea, and the nature of the seafarer's work. The study also incorporates some iconographic evidence, though that has also developed into something of a separate project, which I can talk about afterwards if people have questions. As Tom has said, the Mortar Wreck was found in English waters, though it was built using timber felled in South East Ireland. It may sound obvious, but this reflects the nature of maritime history, which can be local, national, and international in scope. The story of the Mortar Wreck is not just an Irish, nor an English one. I want to talk very briefly about the political and geographical background to all of this. In the 12th century, as you see on this map, England belonged to the Angevin Empire as a consequence of the Norman conquest. This was a realm stretching from the Pyrenees to the Scottish border at its height. That empire was broken by French territorial conquests in the first half of the 13th century, including the loss of Normandy. But in the mid-1200s, around the time the Mortar Wreck sank, King Henry III of England still ruled parts of Wales and Ireland, including all the major Irish ports, along with the Channel Islands and the wine-rich Duchy of Aquitaine or Gascony in southwestern France, including its own main port, Bordeaux. Sea transport was the glue that held Henry's empire together. The British Isles and Ireland were part of a very well-developed maritime economy by the 13th century, one that ranged from Iberia to Scandinavia and the Baltic, as you can see on this map, with a huge variety of goods travelling by sea. Most of what you see featured here is what England imported. England imported many different things, from Baltic timber and boards to Spanish iron and leather, but its own range of exports was limited and led by wool, tin and grain. Turning to the ships that carried these things, we find from documentary sources, iconographic evidence and archaeology that the typical North European ship of the period was clinker-built and one-masted. This is an image of a ship getting underway, shown on the town seal of Dover from about 1300. And it gives an idea, in very general terms, of what one of the ship types of the period looked like. It had a roughly double-ended hull, rather resembling that of an earlier Viking ship, although probably from rather different origins. But if you look at this graffito, it's from the church on Hayling Island, dates to the 13th, 14th century. And it shows that there were other types of vessel around. The bow and the stern of this ship are not double-ended, they're different in form. The bow is curved and the stern is straight. And alongside vessels like this, other hull shapes also existed. Both the British Isles and Ireland had shipbuilding industries of a sort, but it's very difficult to identify specific shipyards in either place, and that's true really until one gets into the 16th century. Both countries were capable of building large and complex war galleys for the king, but late 13th century English shipbuilding evidence suggests that sometimes even government-funded projects could struggle to find sufficient shipwrights. They seem to have been pretty thin on the ground. Merchant shipbuilding of the 13th century is very poorly documented, and we lack overall figures for the size of the 13th century merchant fleet. But England very clearly had many vessels. We find this in shipping arrests in the, onto this in a sec, in the years 1229 to 1230, for example, the English crown was able to conscript at least 345 English merchant ships for an overseas expedition. In that case, the shipping arrest drew mainly on East Anglia and the cinque ports of Sussex and Kent, leaving out major parts of the national fleet, which was based in Southampton, Bristol, and other places. In Ireland, the most significant ports were those of the southeast, such as Cork, Waterford, and New Ross, as you can see on this map. They were probably also the most significant shipbuilding areas. And the fact that the timber used in the Mortar Wreck came from this area is probably a reflection of its maritime predominance, whether the ship was actually built there or it was built using timber exported from the area. Trade was the primary purpose of most ships, and so the majority of ships must have belonged to merchants or to seafarers who were also traders. Some of these were, some of these were women. Certainly, we find a few widows taking over their husbands' businesses, and some of these people, the men particularly, were owner-masters with a single ship. In other cases, you find owners who co-owned a vessel with other people. Sometimes shipmasters did so. Some owners, like the Southampton magnate Walter Le Fleming, who was around from about 1210 to 1258, actually owned small fleets of vessels. The likelihood is that the Mortar Wreck belonged to a merchant, but we can't be absolutely sure of this. The aristocracy, gentry, and some church institutions also owned ships. I can talk a bit more about the church ships questions if anyone would like to know more. And these people used vessels for transportation, for serving household needs, and also for engaging in trade. Earlier medieval patterns of trading seem to have involved merchants sailing with their own goods in vessels that they also commanded and owned. This was still happening in the 13th century, but change was underway. The historian Richard Britnell identified the rise of what he called the sedentary merchant in the period, someone who stayed at home and either sent employees abroad with their goods or entrusted them to ships owned by other people. The Mortar Wreck research has found evidence to support Britnell's thesis. The volume of shipping used was, of course, related directly to the volume of goods carried, not to the values of those goods. The most valuable English sea trade of the period was the export of wool, which was mainly from the east coast ports to Flanders, where it was turned into cloth. But having said that, wool was not a high volume cargo. The most important employer of English shipping bulk in the 13th century may well have been the Gascon wine trade. This was certainly the case in the 14th and 15th centuries, as detailed customs records from Bordeaux show. We don't have such numerical data from 13th century Bordeaux, but English government sources from the time are absolutely full of references to the wine trade. And perhaps more tellingly, the 13th century was the period in which the English adopted the standard Bordeaux wine barrel, or tun, as it was called, as a measure of a ship's cargo capacity, evidently because wine was such a key cargo. Our modern words for tons and tonnage, of course, come from this, though the units now used are very different. The Mortar Wreck may have been carrying stone when it sank, but there's no evidence that merchant ships were built to take specific cargoes. The mortar vessel could well have shifted a multiplicity of cargo types in its service life. We find evidence for cargoes that included wine, salt, grain, pottery, cloth, and even squirrel skins, which were used for trimming clothing, and many other things besides. Ships were also used to carry pilgrims and other passengers, as well as things like government money ships. Quite a lot of shipments, for example, coming from 13th century Ireland to Henry III's England. Sea transport was by far the cheapest way to move bulk goods over long distances, and this is why it was used to transport stone, timber, lead, and other building materials. The building accounts of Henry III and his son Edward I show huge amounts of material moving by water in this way, and there's ample evidence, both documentary and architectural, show that many other building projects for the church, the aristocracy, and others relied on waterborne transport to get their stone and other construction materials. And to get some idea of the scale of this, to take three royal projects as examples, in 1220s, work on Dover Castle utilised over 1,600 boatloads or shiploads of stone of various kinds. In the 1250s, operations at Westminster shipped in stone on at least 100 occasions. A new building at the Tower of London between 1278 and 1283 used over 480 stone shipments. These and other evidence of both royal and non-royal construction work from the period have led me to think that the stone trade was the second largest employer of shipping bulk in England in the 13th century, after the wine trade. These stone shipments included Purbeck marble, of course, a marble that was prized by both the secular and church elites in the 13th and 14th century. Most of the evidence for this trade comes from the consumption end, either in the form of architectural elements or tomb slabs in the hundreds of locations that Tom has brought to light, or in building accounts. Westminster building accounts from the years 1250 to 1253, for example, show that at least 17 shiploads of marble went from Purbeck to London. Purbeck marble workers became resident in the capital, and some men actually went into business as specialist marble suppliers. A common procedure when it came to procuring marble for projects, at least those involved the Crown, was to send a master mason to Purbeck to select the stone, negotiate with the quarriers, and then buy and ship the material. It wasn't always an easy process. Two surviving letters written in Purbeck in 1253 by a Westminster Abbey mason named Master John of Oxford show that even big institutions might have to rely on loans and credit to get their cargoes loaded and shipped. And that was if they could find a ship in the first place to take the stuff. John's counterpart at Westminster had apparently managed to offend a ship's crew on a previous occasion, and in one of his letters he pleaded with the official to play nice in future so that the sailors would be prepared to take the cargoes. Those shipping the stone risked losing money and perhaps reputation, but maybe not anything more. The sailors who took it routinely risked their lives in one-masted wooden ships like the Mortar Wreck, which were incredibly vulnerable. This final slide shows St Aldhelm's Chapel on the southern tip of the Isle of Purbeck, a 12th century sea mark that may have been very familiar to the crew of the Mortar Wreck as a navigation point. We may never know what caused the Mortar Wreck to sink or exactly when it happened, but I hope that my study, when it's put alongside the extraordinary archaeological evidence of the wreck, will show the enormous range of possibilities that existed in the very complex and changing maritime world of which the mortar ship was a part. Thank you.
Thank both of you for that. That's absolutely fascinating piece of research that draws together a whole series of strands. It's really, really very pleasing to see. We're going to take questions at drinks afterwards because we've got three presentations to. So my pleasure to introduce our second speaker, Dr. Arlene Lace, who's going to talk to us on reconstructing two Habsburg Bourbon royal weddings by deconstructing an adorned print. Arlene is an independent art historian and researcher who received a PhD from the University of York. Her broad range of research interests include women and cultures of collecting, print and exhibition culture, interactions between art and science, and transcultural exchanges, fashion, dress, and travel. So, welcome, and note that the research been conducted in conjunction with Laura Garcia Vendrin, an Associate Conservator of Costume and Textiles at the Fine Arts Museum in San Francisco. Arlene.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Let's see, how can I get onto our presentation? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, okay, great. So unfortunately today, Laura is not able to be with me to present our research findings, but at the end of the presentation, the last slide will have her email address in case anybody has questions that they wanted to reach out to her specifically about. Today, I'm going to present the visual and material analysis of a specific adorned print that's in the British Museum. And yeah, okay. So this adorned print was decorated by an anonymous contemporary owner with swatches of silk, enameled foils, and paillettes that were attached to the print. This craft genre physically disrupts the print medium by cutting away specific areas of the paper substrate and replacing those with fabrics glued or sewn attached to the back of the print to expose textiles that resemble real clothes through the cutout forms. And this is just to give you an idea of what the reverse of this print looks like. Decorating prints with textiles was popular on the European continent during the 18th and 19th centuries and is usually considered a craft associated with women in the upper echelons of society. But as we don't know who actually produced this, adorned print, we can't make that assumption. So few examples of this craft medium survive because of the fragility of the materials and the lack of value that has been historically associated with these complex objects. The anonymous print, entitled Leopold II and his family at the arrival of both Sicilian majesties in Vienna, marks the occasion when King Ferdinand IV and Queen Maria Carolina traveled especially from Naples to Vienna with the rest of the family for two important weddings taking place at the between the royal families on August the 15th and September the 16th, September the 15th, 1790. The print depicts a group of 23 elegantly dressed men and female figures standing in a grand palatial room inside the Hofburg Palace. At the bottom of the print is a key referring to all persons in the room. On the right wall is an equestrian portrait and a grand colonnade in the background, a symbol of power and stability. And stability opens out into the city with a direct view of the Baroque St. Charles Church and its imposing dome. The two kings are shown at the center of the print. They shake hands, a gesture echoed by their wives standing off to the left side. Extended family members of different ages are gathered around the space and engaged in conversation. The pictorial interplay of touching and overlapping figures across the picture plane creates a solid sculptural frieze that spans the total width of the print. It bestows a monumental aspect to the family portrait that has been depicted on an otherwise ephemeral paper medium. Taking the adorned print as Ariadne's thread, our project began by employing Ginsberg's theoretical framework and using this print as a guide that enabled us to follow various paths. Along the way, we collected diverse strands of information that have been produced through material analysis and art historical contextualization and interpretation. Working collaboratively and interweaving archival sources with photographic magnifying instrumentation and digital humanities, we pieced together a matrix that enabled us to study the print's visual and material cultures from multiple turns and discover hidden connections between the consumption of prints, political motivation, silk manufacture, and historical preservation. The subject of the adorned print may or may, the subject of the adorned print may or may not have held significance to the maker, but that the wedding celebrations were by large propagandistic events at a crucial time may have inspired them. Eleanor Forrester's research on the correspondence between Maria Carolina and her brother, dating from around 1786, reveals that Queen Maria Carolina was already in conversation with her brother Leopold II, Grand Duke of Tuscany, regarding potential arranged marriages for their children. As their older brother, the enlightened despot Joseph II, Holy Roman Emperor, had no children of his own, Leopold's sons, Francis II, became the focus of the future succession. Following negotiations, it was agreed that Princess Maria Theresa was to marry Leopold's second son, Ferdinand, the future Grand Duke of Tuscany. As Joseph was still Holy Roman Emperor, he arranged Francis's marriage to Elizabeth of Württemberg. But in an unexpected turn of events, the Archduchess Elizabeth died in childbirth, and Emperor Joseph died 2 days later on February 20th, 1790. This meant that Leopold II was now Holy Roman Emperor, and the original Tuscan Neapolitan wedding plans proceeded as previously agreed on. But now the recently widowed Francis was also looking for a wife. In a letter dating February 25th, 1790, Leopold wrote to Maria Carolina, confirming that he would draw up royal documents in 3 months, asking her to give him one of their daughters as a wife, and he would make a second proposal for another one of their daughters that would not displease her. Official courtship letters were drawn up and sent to Naples in July 1790 by personal envoy. Marriage agreements were cemented between Leopold and the Neapolitan court, but this time under different terms. It was decided that Princess Maria Theresa was to be betrothed to the recently widowed Francis and their second daughter, Maria Louisa, to Ferdinand. The weddings took place by proxy in Naples, and soon thereafter the family traveled to Vienna to celebrate 2 weddings. The meeting of these 2 families in Vienna is the subject of this print. It celebrates the gatherings and performances hosted at court, but the weddings took place at 2 crucial times in Habsburg history. Firstly, the Austro-Turkish War, begun 1788 with Emperor Joseph, in which Austria, allied with Russian forces against the Ottomans, was coming to an end, and many of the territorial gains at the start of the war were now lost. Second, there was the outbreak of the French Revolution, just the previous year, which had placed Leopold and Maria Carolina's younger sister, Queen Marie Antoinette, and the French court in very precarious situation. Given these anxieties, prints like these served not only as souvenirs that contributed to a rich public memory, but as propagandistic tools, assuring royal supporters and warning their adversaries of dynastic stability. So while we were carrying out archival research, we also found quite a few unembellished prints that were either similar or the same as the embellished print at the British Museum. And I'm not going to go into these at the moment because we recently prepared an article that's currently under peer review. But at this point, I would like to go a little bit into silk manufacture and and how the royal couple from Naples were highly invested in this endeavor. Although connections between so in 1789, Ferdinand and Maria Carolina assembled the local population of San Leuccio into a thriving silk colony. The project was part of a bigger plan to revive the Italian Campania region through agricultural improvements. Ferdinand commissioned the architect Francesco Collicini to devise a plan and build a wall around the designated area to reinforce the colony's boundaries. The monarchs introduced healthcare, pensions, and schooling, uniforms, and fixed wages for both men and women's silk laborers made it easy to control and keep the workers in line. The monarchy's goal was to build a silk manufacturing city called Ferdinandopoli, but for various reasons, including the French Revolution, the city was never actually brought to fruition. Not only is silk a dominant fabric used to embellish the print, the king and queen implemented a strict code of laws concerning wedding arrangements for the San Leuccio colonists that were published in a code of laws by the Neapolitan Royal Press in 1789. The law stipulated that parents should not interfere at all in this choice, which should be completely up to young people. Arranged marriages and dowries were outlawed, and young men and women were encouraged to marry for love. Additionally, women could not marry before the age of 16 and men 18. The Habsburgs were well known for their consanguineous marriages, and like her mother, Empress Maria Theresa, Maria Carolina was highly committed to maintaining her family's power and political ambitions. She went to great lengths to assure her children's weddings were advantageous, especially during this potentially unstable phase of empire. Similar to the arranged marriages taking place that year in Vienna, King Ferdinand and Maria Carolina's wedding had been carefully calculated by the Empress, who strategically sought to gain more territory for the House of Habsburg following their huge losses during the War of Austrian Succession. Maria Carolina's extensive concern over her children's advantageous marriages is revealed in letters written to her brother. She was highly preoccupied that her two brothers might dissolve all wedding plans, and Leopold needed to constantly assure her that the wedding would take place. When considering the quote found around the adorned found at the bottom of the adorned print, nature indeed hath yet bound their hearts, love again hath yet new ribbons found. In the context of royals' weddings, it may not have been nature like the romantic love promoted at San Leuccio that bound the couple's hearts, but nature as in bloodlines and family trees. The laws concerning parental exclusion from weddings that had been written up for the San Leuccio colonists the previous year contrasts greatly with the extensive protocols that were followed by royalty to arrange suitable matches for the weddings taking place there between royal couples in Vienna, especially that of Francis and Maria Theresa, the future Holy Roman Emperor and Empress. The anonymous maker of this adorned print may or may not have been aware of the monarch's royal silk colony or its experimentation with unusual marriage laws, which reflected a nascent romanticism ideology. But the maker's choice to undress and redress the figures with silk adds a new layer of meaning that creates a contradictory picture space, comparing the royals' preoccupation with powerful wedding alliances with their own to that of the royal silk factory. The print alludes to and challenges the liberal paternalistic image being promoted at their utopian silk colony. So now we're going to tie the past with the present and go into the textile analysis. If we were to map the adorned print's life cycle, it would include distinct processes for paper, textile, and metallic elements. For the material study of this particular print, we focused on understanding the choices of an anonymous maker who grabbed a print that was likely soiled and folded in half and turned it into a work worthy of admiration. Cutting out portions of the original prints to accommodate the insertion of textiles transformed what could have been a forgotten print into a remarkable object with a second life. We relied heavily on examining the back of the print, where larger fabric fragments were less degraded and easier to distinguish due to their size. Analysis began by virtually deconstructing the composition created by paper cutouts and the addition of fabrics and metallic elements. Each figure in the print was assigned a letter for easy identification, and diagrams were made to track fabric patterns and similarities. The textile analysis followed, where fabrics were coded by weave structure, placement, and occasionally color. Notes on the construction technique and condition were also logged. This process required careful observation, particularly when distinguishing degraded materials. For example, a weave with a red dye that had faded on the front was identified at the front and back of the print by the location and the characteristic pattern of a grid of tiny squares, despite the differences in color. This textile analysis revealed some challenges. Many fabric fragments were too small or lacked identifiable features, and so they were excluded. Overall, the analysis provided valuable insights into how the maker repurposed certain fabrics, as indicated by visible stitch holes, distortions, and folds, and overcame the challenges of working with some aged materials, such as corroded areas on sequence. We also noticed that the print was colored, likely prior to the intervention of the anonymous adorner. Most of the fabrics used date to the late 18th century and are primarily made of silk, though at least 5 textiles are woven with metal threads. Textile production from 1780 to 1790 introduced smaller floral motifs and softer colors like light pink, orange, blue, and green. The standout fabrics in the print include the one applied for the curtain, which was the most used throughout, as well as a blue fabric, which was the least used. Furthermore, the black velvet used to depict boots and tricorns stands out because of its texture, while several fabrics with metal threads are captivating due to their high cost and craftsmanship. In terms of condition, the fabric used for the child's ensemble seems to have been entirely lost, and one of the elements that conformed the weave structure, as we currently can see only extremely large floats at the front. The black velvet is severely soiled and abraded. Most fabrics are stained on both faces and have lost their color on the front face, likely due to the exposure of light, which signals that the print would have been on display for quite some time. The print also features the application of metallic embellishments like paillettes and metallic threads. At least 3 types of paillettes were identified, ranging in size and use. Paillettes were used resourcefully by placing them on top of sword handles, medals from the order, and decorative trimmings in garments and hairdressing. Repurposed pink metal foils decorate the cuffs and sashes of several characters. Metallic lace and sections of twisted metal threads with a square profile add depth and richness to the clothing and architecture of the scene. Nearly 18 different types of fabric and more than 160 fragments were used. The rotation of fabrics to represent design and dress construction, the precision in cutting paper and adhering metallic elements, and the use of expensive textiles suggests practice, skill, and dedication. The print shows only a handful of imperfections, some untidiness in the application of glue, and a few deviations from the original print's composition, which are likely disregarded by the average viewer. These factors, along with the repurposing of materials, showcase the creativity of this anonymous adorner. In conclusion, the adorned print demonstrates the complex interrelations between textile and print. It represents a crucial moment in European history and a dense layering and virtuous reuse of materials, transforming what might have been a forgotten object into a creative and intricate picture, which offers a glimpse of a fascinating European historical past. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a fascinating small object, and how much we can get out of close analysis of that and seeing its context. Thank you so much, Ali. Our third speaker this evening is Professor Chantal Cornelier from the University of Newcastle. She's talking to us this evening on a prehistoric persistent place at Hill, Wiltshire. Chantal is Professor of Early Prehistory at Newcastle University. She's directed excavations at Starcar and various Paleolithic and Mesolithic sites in the Channel Islands, and is currently working at Hill with Josh Pollard from Southampton University. She's author of Archaeology of Materials 2011, co-author of the excavation Starcar report, and a volume on the Mesolithic in Britain. So welcome, Chantal.
Thanks very much, Martin. Thanks for inviting me. And I'm really pleased to be able to tell you about our exciting excavations at Cheryl, which directed by me and Josh Pollard, but you can see many people are involved and have had great contributions to the work. So where are we talking about? So we moved from an object in the last thing to a massive landscape in this talk. We are looking at the broader Avebury landscape. So we have the really important landscape of Neolithic monuments with the Avebury Henge, but earlier monuments as well, such as the West Kennet Barrow and Windmill Hill, other Neolithic monuments such as Silbury Hill. Cheryl is just here, just over the other side of the chalk ridge. So this is a fantastic Neolithic landscape. But actually relatively little is known about the early prehistory of this important region. In fact, a few decades ago, it was sort of possible to say that there really wasn't much going on earlier, before the Neolithic, in the Mesolithic period. So really, the one exception to this was the site of Cheryl itself, which underwent quite small-scale excavations in 1967 by John Evans and Isabel Smith in advance of a small housing development. This is a really important site with a significant early and late Mesolithic material and early Neolithic material. And in terms of the Mesolithic, it was the one thing that really stood out as a sort of primary focus site. Since then, the gaps have begun to filled in. Since the 90s, we have a lot more evidence for Mesolithic activity in the Avebury region. You can see these red dots here. So we have low density Mesolithic flint work in the uppermost Kennet. So a number of projects have brought this to attention, such as the Living with Monuments project and Abby George's PhD work. And Josh Pollard has suggested that this, that the scatter of flint they found at Butler's Field, Avebury, it's very close to the Winterbourne Kennet and a very potentially long-term crossing point. So we're beginning to sort of understand a bit more about this landscape. So turning now to the site itself. So this small area here had some nice 1960s bungalows built on them. A visiting German schoolboy noticed the access road seemed to cut through an area of lots of prehistoric material. So this led to actually quite small-scale excavations. Just on the footprint you can see here of a couple of these houses. What's exciting about this area is it seemed to reveal a very well stratified site, which is extremely rare in this landscape, which has had a long history of ploughing. Most things exist as plough zone scatters. So it's got a long history, a late glacial marl or sort of lake deposit, overlaid by the development of an early buried soil. Then we have tooth deposits. So these are sort of spring deposits coming down from the chalk, where calcium carbonate makes this sort of white water and this white sediment that coats things. And then they found a further soil, and this was then subsequently cut by early Neolithic up to sort of Bronze Age ditches. The site probably wasn't appreciated as much as it could be, because there was a bit of controversy and differences in interpretation about the nature of these sort of buried soils, with some specialists seeing the lowest one as having a really nice early Mesolithic assemblage, followed by later Mesolithic material in the tooth and the upper ones, with some early Neolithic material in the uppermost buried soils, whereas others saw much more of a sort of general late Mesolithic sequence date for the vast majority of the sequence. However, I looked at some of the collections from when I was doing my Mesolithic book, and it did seem pretty clear that there is an early Mesolithic soil at the bottom of this sequence, with a nice fauna of mainly wild pig, with Neolithic, sort of a late Mesolithic associated with the tooth and buried soil fauna much more focused on aurochs. So we became interested. In fact, Josh was worked extensively in this landscape, was aware of a very large field next to this small housing estate. The farmer was very happy for us to work there, so we started some investigations in 2002 to try and understand what was going on, along with coring and a geophysical survey undertaken by Philippe de Schmet. So we wanted to see if this really exciting stratigraphy was preserved in this soil, and also whether we saw a continuation of this archaeology of various different periods. So these are our early test pits, 2 rows of test pits. And happily, we can see this really amazing stratigraphy. So here we have at the bottom this very thick early Holocene, Mesolithic age buried soil. We see the beginnings of sort of tufa development, probably sort of tufa spring colluviation going down. And within it, you can see really nice little buried soils as things dry out and soils start developing again. You can even see the dark things, little turf, really nice little turf lines. So we've got this really amazing sequence of things building up over time, and then with a sort of, again, another buried soil over the top, you can just see here. And we found a lot of archaeological material as well. A lot of it, interestingly enough, as you can see here, follows the line of what Evans and Smith called Ditch 1. So they weren't sure whether it was an actual ditch or a quarry pit, but it's a very wibbly sort of linear feature, but we're picking it up in our test pits here. But you see most pits yielded material. So I'd like to just go into our findings a bit, period by period. So thinking about the early Mesolithic, this was really substantial part of the Evans and Smith excavations. Huge amounts of boxes in the Wiltshire Museum, and I hadn't quite clocked when I was looking through all this huge amounts of material, but most of it's actually from a tiny area of their excavations. So these are 1x1 test bits. This is a 2x2 one. We get 2x2 test bit, 2x1 test bit. We get huge amounts of flint, lots of faunal remains, which is very rare for the Mesolithic in this region. Lots of wild pig, red deer and roe deer, even a pection shell showing connection to the coast, but lots of different activities, a real sort of intensive area. But what we didn't know is whether these were sort of two different sites or one mega area. This is the area in between is now houses, but happily one of the residents allowed us to dig a little test pit in her garden. But you can see this amazing stratigraphy within her garden. Unfortunately, for Mesolithic fans such as myself, a Neolithic ditch had cut right through our test pit. But within it, we had lots of redeposited early Mesolithic material, late Mesolithic material, faunal material. We actually dated pig jaw at the base of the ditch to 2600 BC, which is interesting because that's when the Avery Monument is really being built. But lots of early Mesolithic material, which suggests we are dealing with with a large area where probably people came back again and again, but it's an important spot in the landscape. In our test bits, we haven't found very much early Mesolithic material, which is in itself quite interesting, apart from one really nice retouched blade within this basal buried soil. This is retouched. This seems to me, from what we found at Starcar, to be a sort of off-site activity. So people have a settlement area in one region, but they undertake sort of small-scale tasks, perhaps butchery of an animal, perhaps cutting of material in off-site areas. Moving on to the sort of late Mesolithic, the land rises up to the chalk here, and a lot of it's ploughed out. We get a lot of late Mesolithic and Neolithic material in this sort of plough zone area, where it's sort of mingled together. But we get interesting late Mesolithic stratification towards, as we move north, as we get lower down in the field. And in fact, our very first test bit found quite exciting material. Obviously, just as we were sort of cleaning the section, out popped a lovely aurochs skull. We've extended this test pit in sort of larger scale excavations last summer. And what we find is a really amazing area of tufa springs, probably a channel going through it. This sort of later water activity sort of cuts some of the Mesolithic buried soils that you can see in the back of the picture. There are some suspicious lumps and bumps here, and these are animal footprints. So you can see here some of the larger ones, which seem to be aurochs, so aurochs toe prints. The smaller ones seem to be deer of some form. They're not very clear, probably because it's quite a soggy area, so the animals are slipping around a bit. So yes, animals presumably drinking on the edge of this body of water, whether it's a sort of pond, as Evans found, or there's channels going through it as well. There's also very interesting clusters of archaeological material towards the base of this sort of potential water feature. So here we have a nice little cluster of roe deer antlers with some flint. Here's flint and animal bone. This is an ochre crayon and more flint. Another little cluster of flint was also associated with this really amazing antler mattock. These are quite rare. They're generally found as dredging finds from major rivers. They've got quite a wide range of dates from 8,000 to 4,000 BC. Most seem to be 6th millennium, and that broadly fits with the sort of shape of the microlith. They're sort of probably 6th, 5th, and 5th millennium. Unfortunately, we tried to date this, but it didn't work, alas. If we did looking at archaeological material within a water body that's sort of in a pond or a channel, we need to think about how it's got there. Is it stuff that's being washed off a bank by running water? Or is it, certainly when we're digging them, they've very much had the feel of placed deposits. So everything we recorded, the orientation of dip of all our finds, so we could see if there's directionality in the objects. And there was a bit, so there probably is a little bit of movement, but we've also got refits. So these are just over about a metre. So things might be moving a bit, but not massively. So you can see nice, and this is quite interesting. It shows sort of ad hoc tasks being undertaken on the banks of this water body. A nodule's been split, and this thing here has been retouched, presumably for sort of immediate tasks. So in terms of our deposition, we do have some water movement, but refits. But the composition is quite interesting. It does seem to be, of the archaeological material, we seem to find a sort of selectively deposited assemblage. So the faunal remains are quite peculiar. So we have antlers of both red deer and roe deer, and boar teeth, tusks overrepresented. We've got aurochs skull, we've got a mattock, we've got this very nice engraved rib. So it's not a great photo, but you can see these sort of parallel incisions, and these are on both sides. So these aren't cut marks. This is decoration. Flint also is a bit odd. We've got a few refits, but everything else seems to be more like a signature of toolkits. So it's larger stuff, no small debris, things that look like they're from different nodules. So it's very probably things that have been used, have had long histories, and then put in this location. So interesting things going on in the late Mesolithic. If we move up the hill a bit, up the slope, we come to our other main area of excavation last summer. And this is the area of Evans and Smith's sort of wobbly trench 1. It now looks like it's a natural linear feature, perhaps created by water or animal-related erosion. But it doesn't really seem to have a cut. It's quite wobbly, but it's full of midden material. It's a very dark soil, lots of pot, flint. Presumably people are using this natural hollow to dump material from adjacent settlements. And whereas Evans and Smith got lots of early Neolithic material, we're getting middle Neolithic settlement. The pottery is Peterborough ware, and we've got a large flint assemblage, and there's huge amounts of material. Here's just a few examples. We're on the edge of the chalk, so people are using local flint, but there are some exotic lithics, so edge-polished knife, of Yorkshire, Lincolnshire type, and really nice microware undertaken by Ben Chan. Shows the middens really sort of full of lots of different material with sort of different histories, so stuff used in plants, for scraping hides, and a lot of very nice cord impressed Peterborough ware. So just to finish off, and these excavations are ongoing, so these interpretations are provisional, but just to think about what we've got and its relationship to the wider Avebury landscape. So first of all, this is a site that people have come back to for millennia, from the early Mesolithic, probably about 8,500 BC. Into the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age. It's at a very advantageous area. It's on the edge of the chalk. Next to it's the junction of the Greensand and the chalk. It's at the end of the field is a small stream which joins eventually into the Bristol Avon, which is a route to the Severn Estuary. So it's a real routeway between east and west. We've got this small ridge of chalk between the western routeway from the western routeway to the Bristol Channel and to the Kennet, where we know there's lots of in the lower middle Kennet there's lots of Mesolithic activity. It seems to be a long-standing natural routeway that people visit over very long periods of time. And probably in the early Mesolithic, we have connections to the west. We've got a scallop shell that may have well been obtained from the Bristol Channel. In the late Mesolithic, we have this important site of 2-for-2 position. We may see people perhaps getting together, doing slightly unusual things between these two important rivers. The Neolithic ceramics show the early Neolithic material, particularly found by Evans and Smith, show cultural links with Windmill Hill and West Kennet, as you might, unsurprisingly, given their proximity. We've also found a perforated shell bead, which has parallels in the West Kennet long barrow. And our most recent, our dating of the pig in the base of the ditch shows people actually here, also when we have the Avery henge being constructed. So we've got lots going on over a very long period of time at potentially a long-standing routeway, an area of connections between different river systems. And we hope to untangle some more of these connections thanks to the Society's lovely grant for this coming summer. So thanks to very many people who participate in these excavations.
Thank you, Chantal. We don't often go back into deep prehistory in these rooms, so it's really fascinating to see that both the depth of the time, but also the changing geographical context. So thank you so much for that. We're going to close the meeting now, giving notice that the next meeting is on Thursday, the 9th of October, and fellows may wish to know that the new season's lecture programme is just going up online. So I don't know what the lecture is on the 9th of October, but the programme is beginning to come through. So if you want to look ahead, please do. Today's meeting is followed by the summer soiree for fellows and guests in the council room. I'm asked to tell you that this is a ticketed reception, so anyone who wishes to attend who has not yet paid should please have a word with Yola. But do join us across for a drink where you'll be able to talk to the speakers and ask questions. And I therefore declare the meeting closed, adjourned. Thank you very much indeed.